I guess, and we'll kind of get going. So just to get started off, I just want to remind everyone that this is something that we all know. The concept that that no human being is illegal or anything that we all recognize, no matter where you come from, no matter where your family is from, no matter where you are from, we all recognize the dignity of the human person. That's the foundation of our faith, is the respect and ability to know that that God has breathed life into every single human person, just as He did the first person. And so we know that what a great gift that is. So that's why we do this work. Every element of our Catholic Charities work is because no matter how your situation is, that we want to recognize your dignity and the wholeness of each person. So that's just kind of our philosophical statement to kind of get it going. So I'm going to just do a few minutes of kind of reviewing a little bit about what we've talked about over the past couple of weeks, and then we'll be waiting for your questions to start rolling in. Okay, so let's talk for just a minute about some of the research that's concerning some of the immigrants that's here. So basically, there's some things just to sort of talk about. That really, there's a lot of information that we're hearing from recent research studies that are being done and surveys and seeking out information from people that really does raise the flag that it's important for us as providers to be aware of the concept of trauma-informed care dealing with people who are migrating. So we can see that like that first block there, since 2016, adults across the country have reported spikes in distress, and then that's led to spikes in diagnosed anxiety disorders and depression among clients that we're seeing. So many of the clients that you're seeing are coming, and they're maybe coming to you for maybe some sort of legal assistance, or maybe immigrant services, or maybe even feeding or housing services, but many of them are coming with associated behavioral health problems. And so we're just seeing that in all 5 of the little blocks there, talk about that and sort of report that concept over and over. How the current environment, how the socio-cultural environment right now, the political social cultural environment is impacting human beings in their lives and their behavioral health. So this is just a significant thing. You can see this is just 5 examples of things I found in doing a research search to see what's going on through different things like that. So it's important for us to really just be aware of that. So we can just go to the next slide, which helps us to sort of define exactly what trauma is from a larger concept. And as I'm talking, these are some of the things that I've talked about in a previous webinar, but I thought it would be good to kind of review a little bit of it and give you a chance to kind of think of some questions. But basically, trauma is something that occurs, it's an event that occurs outside of a person, or a situation that's occurring or surrounding a person. It could be one event, or it could be a series of events, or it could be a process that includes several different events within it, like the process of migrating from your home to a new place. That I think that's a traumatic event in itself, but if you have all these barriers all along the way, that builds on the trauma and enhances it. So the analogy I've always used is that that it's something that a trauma is something that's external to the person or to us as humans that comes into our life, and it overwhelms the system that we have. And I always use that analogy of like a water removal system or a sewer system in a small town, where the town handles when its daily rain occurs, the water removal system can handle the rain and clearing it out, and so that everybody's still safe. But when there's a big old flood, then that water removal system becomes overwhelmed, and the water backs up and causes damage to the geography of the little town. Well, it's the same thing with us as persons, that our bodies are built to handle stress in incremental doses, where we take a stressful event and we can deal with it and kind of hope we get anxious for a little bit or have the fight or flight experience for a little while. But and then the process goes away. That's how we're built to handle. That's our survival tools. But when it's chronic and when it's sustained, then that's traumatic, and it's really tough on the human body. So it impacts us, as the definition here says, it impacts our mental, our physical, our emotional, and our spiritual well-being. I like this definition that's written here because it includes all those aspects of the person. We think about, like, sometimes people say, oh, how does that affect your spiritual well-being? Well, people begin to kind of doubt that they're safe. Is God looking out for us? Why would God leave this to happen to me? There's all those questions kind of occur because of the anxiety and the stress and the fear that we're having. So I feel like those are just some elements. So maybe there's pastoral concerns as well as psychological and just physical concerns that we have when people are coming to us in a traumatized state. So just to say that we know that this is way more than just an emotional kind of, in quotes, emotional response that somebody's got this in their head. Well, we do have it in our heads, but biologically it's there. So as you know, like we talked about in a couple of these webinars leading up to this, that we know that there's a process that occurs. That it might occur in the moment of the trauma. So say, for instance, someone is crossing a border and there's the fear of an ICE agent or someone coming that way. Well, that's going to shoot up a person's adrenaline load within their body and within their brain to help them to have that ability to either run or fight back or to hide or to whatever. The body does that to protect itself, and it happens through this HPA axis. The information comes in through the hypothalamus saying, hey, let me figure this out. What's this data coming in? Uh-oh, this is danger. So therefore, then that kicks in the pituitary gland, and then that kicks in some information or the neurochemicals that are sent to the adrenal gland that then releases adrenaline. And that also within that is released cortisol. And the cortisol is something that's intended to be sent through the body in just very small doses, but really because it's kind of damaging to the body in a lot of ways. So if somebody that's had this consistent anxiety and consistent sort of traumatic experience over and over, then cortisol running through your body over and over kind of can tend to kind of cause what we call an allostatic load, this load that your body's carrying, and within your nervous system, then things get worn down and kind of damaged after the over and over experience of this trauma. Then also cortisol is supposed to send a message back to the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, okay, the danger is over, you can relax now and carry on. But when there's this consistent and when trauma is occurring over and over or repetitively, then the cortisol then no longer is able to provide that feedback. So then there's adrenaline and cortisol that continues to flow through the body even when the person might be in a more safe environment. Maybe they've made it to a place, a shelter or something that's safer, but yet their heart's still pounding and their eyes are still dilated and they're still nervous and afraid. And then that's what leads to the concepts of the diagnostic categories. Then one more thing about this is that just within the moment of the trauma, there's the reaction, but then years later, the body keeps the score, actually. That's the name of a book, which I would highly recommend to you. It's a book, Bessel van der Kolk. It's a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and he talks about this, and it's true. There's an area of the brain called the amygdala that hangs on to things that are traumatic. And the reason that it hangs on to those things is so that when they happen again, or when there's some sensory input related to a trauma, then the amygdala serves as an alarm system. And the amygdala says, hey, wait a minute, this has happened before. This smell, this sight, this sound, this taste even was dangerous to me before, and I need to alert this guy's body that something bad is happening, and I'm going to send the cortisol and all that kind of acting through now. Even though a person might have this experience in a dream, they might have this experience just sitting in a restaurant and they get a whiff of a smell that reminds them of something that occurred during the traumatic actual time period. So it's almost like you're brought back to that time, and that leads to the experience of anxiety and stress and all those kinds of things as if you are in the moment. So we call that that's a difficult thing to have to live through, and then that's what leads to then the next thing, which is the diagnosable categories of a post-traumatic stress disorder. That's when a person kind of like is continuing to reorient their life around the traumatic event. Even though it happened years ago or months ago, the body is still, and the person's mindset is still oriented around that traumatic experience. So that's when we come to the level of a diagnostic category where we can get engaged with therapeutic interventions that are helpful, and also maybe pharmaceutical interventions that might be helpful for someone. But for us that may be just case managers, or not just, but that are case managers, or folks like us that are working just kind of helping people in a shelter or in a place like that, that there are things that we can do to help treat someone that has post-traumatic stress disorder just by helping them feel safe, letting them experience the emotions that they're experiencing and not judging them and just trusting them that they're going to work through this. and not judging them, and the whole point of just acceptance there. So then we can see that people that have experienced the process of migration, that there can be traumatic interventions throughout the process. So we say like the pre-migration trauma can be because maybe a gang has hurt a child or hurt a family, and then that motivates them to want to leave their home, and the place that was once safe for them is no longer safe. Or maybe economic fear of not being able to feed your family or whatever, things like that occur at pre-migration that are indeed traumatic. Then you move to the next, the in transit, or the middle kind of process of when you're actually crossing over into another place or migrating to a new place, that there's all kinds of traumatic things like that can occur. Unfamiliar geography, unfamiliar situations that can lead people to fear, to have that trauma stress reaction, people chasing after you, or people taking advantage of you, people assaults, physical and sexual abuse and assault that occurs along the way. Those things are all just overwhelming to the human body system that occur along the in-transit process. And then even you come and you think, okay, well, wow, I'm finally here, and then realize that there's prejudice and discrimination that occurs in the place that you thought was going to be a safe place, and then you end up feeling some of that danger and fear again for your life, and then that can be traumatic in itself. So as you can see, individually, any of those three can carry all kinds of different traumatic experiences, but put it all together, and that becomes a complex, chronic experience of trauma, which really can send someone into those diagnostic categories: anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, that really would benefit from like a licensed professional to be able to help. But many of us who are case managers or volunteers in a shelter, or whatever those roles that we play, if we are just there to be with the person, it's the relationship that can be the most healing factor. So not judging, not kind of telling somebody this is what you ought to do. Hey, listen to me, let me give you good advice. That's not what we're looking for. We're just looking for acceptance and relationship. And I feel like, and that's a big part of the healing process from trauma, which leads us to think about how does this particularly impact children. So there's been a big study that was done called the ACEs study, and it's the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And this was done actually in the late 90s. And it demonstrates basically the lifelong impact that a traumatic event, like socio-cultural, political, external events that can occur in a person's life, especially in childhood, but adulthood as well, that impacts the person's whole life. So let me just say real quick that, say if someone has a really horrible negative experience in transit in a migration experience, then the person's body kind of adapts to that. And I was saying a second ago how that might be a memory that's held on in the person's body for a long time, and they're holding on to it. Well, that it disrupts some neurological and physiological developments within the growing child, and that because of the overload of cortisol or whatever that's going through the body, so that impacts their maybe physiological development. If someone is a little bit has a deviation in socio-cultural, in physiological development, then that can lead to adaptations in behavior. Then the adaptations in behavior then can lead to maybe feeling like not part of the community, or feeling ostracized, or feeling lonely. That could be a real experience of that. And then because we're feeling lonely, or because we have these experiences of stress and anxiety, then we think, well, I need to smoke or drink or eat too much or whatever to help myself feel better, to deal with that. Well, then those types of behaviors then can lead you to have more physiological problems like diabetes or heart conditions or whatever, and then that leads to an early death. So really, we're talking about here, when we're engaging in trauma-informed practice, it's life-saving. It's a life issue. If we're aware of this stuff, that these things happen, they shorten people's lives. So it's really important to think about how we can help boost people along the way. So that's a really important thing that we've learned from this adverse childhood experiences, and especially how we apply it to the relationships that we have with our clients who are immigrating. So, okay, here's a bunch of quotes that just to sort of follow up what I was just speaking about. And so the quotes are kind of stuff like, I have never seen so many anxious children in a classroom. That's from a teacher. And quotes like, a student came to me and said if I could, what did I say? A student came to me and asked me if I could be her mom in case her mother gets deported. So these are just what the fears and the anxiety that kids are living with. to have a healthy development for someone's life, they should not be living in this kind of fear and kind of anxiety, that oppression that people are living with. So you'll be able to get these slides and you can see these quotes. They're worth reflecting on, I think, just to kind of hear what people are experiencing from children that are migrants here into our country. So let's see. We'll talk a little bit of the next one here. So some of the factors, again, this is specifically aimed at children. Some of that three-step thing I was talking about, the pre-migration, in transit, and then post-migration. This is specifically talking about kids. The pre-migration really is that when you leave your country or leave your homeland, that there's a disruption to education. So you think about it, when you're taken away, you're taken out of that sort of like a daily schedule. You're taken out of a routine. Routines are really important for kids that are developing. And so when the whole process of migration is going to be a disruption to a routine or a ritual that a child has. So then that leads to the migration thing, which there's oftentimes separation from caregivers that children are used to having a connection with. We know that childhood development is really dependent on a healthy connection with adults or other caregivers in their life. Early childhood infants, the brain architecture is built through the kind of a relationship that they have with their parents or their primary caregivers. That kind of thing where a baby looks at an adult and kind of Googles and back and forth, and the adult kind of smiles and Googles back, or if the baby's crying and the adult is sad and says, oh yeah, I understand. The baby in their mind isn't saying this explicitly, but is just kind of talking to themselves saying, hey, these people get me. Like they get me. I feel safe and I feel comfortable because somebody gets me. Well, as a child is going along, if they're separated from their caregiver who, in quotes, gets them, then that is disruptive to their development and development of the brain architecture. So this is something that happens in the period of migration. And then just to point out the experience of poor nutrition, what a deal that is. Then in the post-migration thing, specifically talking about children, is basically the concept of acculturation. And this is when the body kind of has to orient all the way around a new way of living and a new way of understanding, a new way of speaking. And this is something where sometimes a child maybe becomes the spokesman for the family. Children, physiologically, the window of language acquisition is more open for younger children. So they have an easier time adapting to a new language in a new area. So maybe they become, because their parents have that windows closed a little bit for that adaptation to a new language, the children become responsible for communicating in the English language or whatever language of the country where they've migrated to, and they end up being the translator. This is tough because then this is a concept we call the parentified child, where the child is lifted out of the normal placement for them, kind of like as to be cared for and be looked after by their parents, and then the children kind of come up to that upper level where the parents are, and then kind of that's just can be a difficult thing for a child. It's disruptive to development. So that's important to think about that parentified child concept. Okay, so then just a couple more slides here, and then we'll move into some questions. Basically, kind of what do I do? How do I respond to all this? What am I going to do about it? Basically, the whole trauma-informed concept is kind of hinged on this. Not what's wrong with you. Like, why are you so anxious? You're safe now. You're here now. Why are you so worried about things? What's wrong with you? Why are you acting like that? That's not the questions that we should be asking. What's wrong with you? We should say, what happened to you? Tell me about your experience. I'm here to listen. The whole thing is a good example of a few years ago, I broke my foot. And if I walked into a room and everybody said to you, when they saw the cast on my foot and said, what's wrong with you? Well, it's obvious. I mean, I'm hurt. Nobody said that. They said, what happened to you? It's the same thing going on with trauma. Good. So let's see. Then the idea of what's wrong with you to what happened to you, and then the idea of from control to collaboration. This is key for us that are volunteers or case managers or folks that are staffing shelters. I think there's a tough line to walk where how do I help the person feel like they don't have to make decisions, they don't have to direct everything, but to feel like that we're going to collaborate with them on what they want and what they need rather than just us taking over their life, kind of a thing when they come to us. So that's one of those elements from switching from I'm in control as the provider to I collaborate with you as provider with client. And so then we can look real quick at some of the next slides there. Basically, these are the core principles of trauma-informed care, that we are all aware that everyone has been through a trauma, that we do all we can to convey that everyone is safe, that we do everything we can to recognize that it's going to be tough for a client to trust us when we're coming into their life, because I feel like that there's so many reasons to not trust people after what many of the people have been through. To give them as much choice as possible. Would you rather be here or would you rather be there? Again, the collaboration, giving the people empowerment to how they're going to have control and steer the wheel for themselves. And then to think about also the whole concept of cultural humility, that I am aware of the person's culture and that I'm not laying my own culture or my own way of doing things onto someone else. And then just here's the last couple slides. I just want to give a little bit of advice. I know that we as social workers, we don't give advice usually, we sort of collaborate, but let me throw some at you anyway. That'd be the next slide. So basically here, if we're providers, that we avoid giving legal advice, that I feel like that we leave that up to whoever the legal person is. And I know some of you might be legal providers here on the phone. That's just important to recognize for us that are not legal providers, to recognize what my role is and what your role is. And then we all know that whole deal about like a notary is a different thing in other countries than it is here in America. Then also to highlight, like, to say you are strong, look how far you've come, look what you've been able to do so far, highlighting that concept, and that's a concept of resiliency, that people know in themselves what they've been able to accomplish and how great that is. And I think just to talk about the immigrant word, when you're talking to clients like that, I feel like that's an important thing. Also, I skipped one. Parents are the experts of their children. I feel like for us giving advice about how to raise children or whatever to people that from another culture or something, that just isn't going to be very helpful. And then to not assume that someone is undocumented just because they might be from another country. I feel like sometimes we end up doing that. Then all we need to do is just get informed. Get informed about what's going on with the larger issue, what the policy initiatives are, what's happening culturally, things like that. And I think also to avoid negative stereotypes. And then here, I'm underlining this one, check your privilege. I feel like that, we have so many ways to control our life, and we are born here, and we don't have any concept of what it's like to be someone who's feeling so disrupted after they've moved to another country and don't understand the culture, don't understand the language. We need to just be aware of that to recognize that. And there's a couple of other bits of advice there that I think are important to kind of look over as well. And again, you'll be able to get these slides later to look at, but I don't want to take up too much time. So now let's talk really briefly about the realization that the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is unrealistic as expected to be able to walk through water without getting wet. That is the whole thing. To recognize that because I'm stressed out about my clients or because I have anxiety and nervousness around the work that I'm doing does not mean that I've blurred boundaries or I'm unethical or that I've made a mistake or I'm a bad person. It's only natural. And I think we need to just realize to give ourselves a bit of a break, to realize it's just like walking through water there without getting wet. You know we're going to get wet. We know we walk in this work that we're going to end up feeling the stress and anxiety of it, and it's okay. But how do we care for ourselves in our work with others too? So, all right. So there's all these different things that people can do from the medium level, kind of like what can we do to walk, read, smile, walk with each other, kind of eat together with friends, build our relationships with one another. On a macro level, what are we doing to kind of like consult with others who are real professionals in this? Could we have a staff retreat to take some time away and kind of talk about how we're going to do this? Celebrate things, celebrate special birthdays, celebrate things together, have a time to laugh together with your team that you work with. And then just for us as individuals, take the break. I mean, I know that I've worked with people that have worked through the whole day without taking a lunch break, that are dying to go to the bathroom at the end of the day kind of thing. We need to take that stuff for ourselves to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves and drinking water and taking good care of ourselves and honor our own boundaries, what our limitations are as human beings. That's okay. And then just kind of here, the next slide is to say that really the deal is that relationships are the agents of change, and the most powerful therapy is human love. And that doesn't mean we have to like love everybody or whatever. I think it does mean we have to love and care and respond to each and every single person as a child of God and as our brother and our sister. And that's the greatest gift that we can offer. I think sometimes we may worry because, oh gosh, I don't have some fancy, flashy type of intervention that you read a book to kind of be able to do. But if I'm just there and listening and kind, that's a big, big, big deal with trauma-informed or trauma-responsive care. So what do you say we open the line a bit for some discussion? That was a brief summary of the last 3 webinars. And now here we can have a chance, hopefully, to answer some questions. And hopefully I'll know the answer.
All right. It looks like, and hopefully I'm seeing this correctly, there are 2 individuals that have their hand raised.
Great.
And again, to share a question or a comment, it looks like it's Miss Jackie. You have your hand raised, so I'll go ahead and unmute your mic if you wanted to pose a question.
What about who have not been granted asylum have already gotten it?
Oops, we couldn't quite hear you. Could you say that again?
Yes.
Jackie?
We can. The thing is that with all this happening about the EADs being late, that has affected everyone.
Okay, I'm going to take it that perhaps the hand raise was an error.
Oh, okay, good.
Because it did appear that that person was having outside conversation, so apologies for that. But if anyone else, go ahead, now is the time to go ahead and input your question to the chat box, or again, use the hand raise tool if you have a question or any comment.
Your hand up. So, okay, here's a question, and one of the questions is, like, how specifically are some of the things that you can do to be able, when you're in that relationship with a person who is an immigrant? What are some things that we need to consider? Okay, so great question. So a couple things that come to mind are the concept of attunement. Did you hear me say earlier about children when they're growing that the brain architecture is developed through what we call like attachment process, where that sort of like response when the baby feels like the parents get them, or the primary caregiver in quotes gets them because they're not laughing at them when they're crying or you know, whatever. So they're consistent with their emotions. So that's such an important thing for children. So folks who have been through trauma a lot of times feel so out of sync with the rest of the world because they're maybe in a place where at a playground or at Dollywood where everybody's having a nice time and they're internally freaking out. It's so isolating and so scary for a person to feel out of sync with the rest of the culture. So I feel like for us as providers, if we can just think about what's a process of attunement, kind of look someone in the eye and say, hey, look, I'm here for you. It doesn't matter what you're feeling. I'm accepting your emotions. And then just to kind of not to try to coax the person out of their feelings, but just to say, hey, express your feeling as it is. And then you could kind of like just be attuned to that, to be able to have that kind of a conversation with the person, because it is so disorienting for someone who is a victim of trauma or who has come here and just feels so out of sync. And I think with migrants, that out of sync internal feeling that someone may feel is enhanced by oftentimes their inability to verbally express it because of a lack of language capacity, or maybe a cultural reason that someone might not be able to feel comfortable expressing emotions. But if we're just there and just say, hey, look, I don't understand what you're going through because I've never been there, or maybe some of you have, which is great. That would be a great connection. But to be able to just say, I get the feeling of being out of sync. I get the feeling of being afraid. I understand. And just to just allow them to share their experience. We call that attunement. And that is a fancy word for just kind of being able to listen and having an open ear and a shoulder to kind of rest your head on. So, is that good? Good.
Yeah.
Okay. And any other questions?
Okay. We have a question from Diana. Any general tips for educators who are not in a public school, who do not have those types of resources?
Oh, great. So for teachers, so you're as an educator, as a teacher, I feel like that one of the big things to think about, say, is just your awareness. Like that was one of the things that I had on that earlier slide. I feel like that if you're aware that some of the kids in your room may be having maybe a recurring experience of trauma internally, or they may feel isolated or culturally isolated or something like that, I feel like that the awareness, and I feel like it's 100% okay to kind of maybe not point a kid out in the class like, hey, young man, how are you doing, in front of everyone, and expect them to get an honest response back, but just to kind of say in a way that's not, whatever, say, hey, how's it going? I know that, maybe even kind of name it with the person, with the child, like, I know that you've only lived here for a little while. I hope you're doing okay. Can you tell me how you're doing? And kids are so honest. I feel like oftentimes they'll be able to kind of tell what their experience is. And I think too with kids, so like giving kids a chance just to sort of express themselves. Sometimes kids can't do it completely verbally, but they may be able to do something through play. Like if there's someone that can play a game with them, and what's this game like for you, or something like that, and have a chance that you're focused on something else, and some of the emotions might come out in the game. Another thing is being able to draw on paper. Hey, can you draw a picture of your house, or can you draw a picture of your family? And you could ask the child like, hey, well, what's the house here? So in clients I've worked with in a more therapeutic setting that have experienced trauma, sometimes like the child will often depict what's going on in the family through drawing something. It's amazing what can come out. And all you'd have to do is say, hey, is this dad? What's that? How is it like with dad? Kind of things like that, just to give them the chance to be a child and sort of talk about it. That's okay. That's okay for a teacher to do, I think. The other thing is that, as I said earlier about the body keeps the score, kids keep this stuff in their body, and as we all do. If we're talking about adults, I think like adults doing yoga or stretching or running or doing something like that is really a great way to reduce anxiety and to reduce some of these negative emotions. The same thing with kids. Kids should be able to be out running around or try to be doing stuff or manipulating stuff or whatever to be able to kind of get some of that emotional stuff out. So you can sometimes even, like, you can see where kids keep their stress, if it's in their stomach or on their chest or whatever, or whatever, you can kind of see where kids sort of hold the stress in their body. To give kids a chance to stretch and get up and kind of run around, that recess time and phys ed time is really, really important to let kids kind of run out some of that energy. I think that's another thing to think about. That's just, of course, a 2-minute answer to a million things we could talk about.
It looks like we have one other question.
Great, great.
You spoke about the child that has to take on this level of like being parentified. Mm-hmm. Would you mind just elaborating or sharing rather some tips that case managers can kind of use to give power back to the parent? Oh, that's a great question. I mean, because I feel like that this is a common thing that can happen in social service. Say a family comes and the parents are just stressed and anxious and maybe are bound by a lack of language capacity. So then the child ends up having to speak for the parents, and then maybe the child is going to act out. I think, like I was saying just a second ago, that oftentimes kids don't have a language for something, so then they'll act it out in behavior. So they'll be rebellious that they really weren't rebellious before, or talk back to their parents, or run away, or kick another kid, or whatever. We don't know, but they're going to act that out in some way. And I think being attuned to that. And here's what happens oftentimes in social services, is that we're case managers or social workers or therapists, then we see the kid getting out of control for whatever reason, because it's the way that they know how to express this. The parents are sort of maybe nervous or afraid about it. Then the case manager may want to step in and start taking the role of parenting the child, or if the children end up being the ones that are communicating, then the case or being the translator for the parents. Then the case manager feeds into that by talking to the child and then directly to the child, and then that burdens the child. So us as case managers can do a couple things to say, hey, is this behavior normal for your child? How do you feel about that? And like kind of engaging the parents always. And even if, I know like sometimes desperate times call for desperate measures. So if you need to use the child as the translator in some sort of an emergency situation, to direct your question to the parent, not to lose your gaze with the child or the engagement with the child, but to remember that you're trying to talk to this whole system. So if that's just an important thing to realize, that the parents are in charge, and to realize that.
And even, I feel like even talking to the parents, asking them questions, even if you don't really have a question, but just sort of say, hey, how has it been with you as a new parent in this as a parent in this new country? Or what's parenting been like here? What are some parental things that you do in your homeland that we might not do here? Maybe I could learn some things from you about how to be a good parent. And that helps bolster the parents to realize that just because this culture is different or may do parenting a little differently than we do in my home culture, to think that my culture does have some validity and does have something to bring or to speak to, that helps them to kind of feel empowered as well. So hopefully, that's a lot of kind of a response to that question, but hopefully you can hear that really that we, I think, in social service can tend to further some of these disempowering things with parents, but to think, what can we do to not just us step in and redirect a child, but to help support the parents in redirecting or supporting their own children, and then also then how, if we really do need to keep the child as the translator, then to always engage with the parents primarily, especially if it's information that's important at that level. Those are a couple thoughts about that.
That's wonderful. Oh, thank you for that feedback.
Sure.
Let's see. The chat box is still open and live, as are your mics should you have another question. Again, just want to offer the opportunity to do so. Again, using the hand raise tool, just to illustrate again how to do so. If you want to pose a question directly, use the hand raise tool, or use the chat box if you have any questions that you would like to send in through written.
Okay, here's another question, I think, is that what if I'm speaking with a client and they begin to get anxious and decompensate right there and before me? Oh, that happens a lot. I mean, I feel like, we're probably all of us that have been working with clients for any period of time, we're telling someone, well, you're going to have to do this, and then it's unexpected to them, and then that triggers that the amygdala alarm bell in the brain, and then the body's just reacting as if they're in the trauma in the moment, and you're just sitting there, and you're kind of thinking, wow, just a couple minutes ago everything was fine, and now this person is completely freaking out. So what do we do? So there's a word called grounding. This may be a common phrase for many of you, but the term grounding. What can I do to ground the person in the here and now? Because what's happening when somebody begins that spiral into anxiety is that they're going back to the there and then. They're going back to the time, the body and the mind is going back to that tough time, the traumatic time, because it's all being re-triggered right there. Just by the words that I'm saying or the smell that the person may hear or a feeling that they have. But what we need to do is help the person be grounded in this moment. You don't have to say, okay, like be real explicit about it. You might just say, hey, is it too warm in here? How's the temperature for you? And then that gets the person tuned into what's the temperature where I'm sitting right now. Or even like, I know it may sound odd to kind of say, what do you think about the color of this wall? They painted it a couple of years ago and I don't like the color. What do you think of the color? And then you're drawing the person into the moment that you're in. Can you feel your shoes in your feet in your shoes on the ground right now? Can you do that? Can you stomp a little bit? Can you feel your back side in the chair that you're sitting in? What's this chair? Is the chair comfortable? Asking things that are about the environment, that's the stimulating environment with them and around them right there, so that they feel like that they can be present to this moment. And then after the person kind of calms down a little bit, you can be able to say, hey, look, I just want you to know that you're here now, you're safe now, as a reminder, kind of dragging the person into the present moment to be able to say, hey, look, this is we're here now, I'm with you, I'm not going anywhere, you're going to be okay, kind of thing. So I think that's important. You're okay right now in this moment. I said that statement, you're going to be okay. I feel like that's a sort of a tendency a lot of times we want to say to people that are in a moment like that is, oh, don't worry, it's all going to work out. Well, we really don't know that. We hope that it works out. We're going to do everything that we can to help it all work out. We're going to take every step to do it. But I think like making a promise like, oh, don't worry, it's all going to be fine, could be heard in a way that is kind of setting somebody up. So, and then later somebody might come back to you, but so-and-so said it was all going to be fine. And I don't know, that just sometimes is a thing just to be aware of, that you're okay right now. And I'm with you right now, and I'm going to do everything that I can to stick with you and to make things turn out well for you. So I feel like that's kind of a really important thing, that concept of grounding. If somebody's sort of kind of feeling that anxiety and that stress right there in front of you, if something arises in themselves. if that makes sense.
Definitely. And last question, it kind of piggybacks naturally to what you just shared a second ago, but do you have any concrete suggestions about what to do in the case of a social worker or a case manager if they're having a moment of where they have frozen themselves because of either what they're hearing has been the past experience of, you know, the migrant mom or child? Do you have any kind of situations where you can provide advice there?
So that's great. I mean, like, I think sometimes people feel this and think, well, gee, I'm a professional, I should be able to handle this, or, you know, whatever. But like, we're all human beings. I mean, if we were home, you know, if we were doing plumbing, you know, I mean, like, you would probably get mad because the wrench didn't work or something like that. It's the same kind of thing. We're humans, we have emotions. And so no matter what job we have, we're going to be emotionally engaged in it because you all want to do a great job. And I think there is just a bit more at stake here because the human person's sitting right there in front of us. And what are we going to do? So, I mean, I've been in moments like that. I have no idea what to say to you in this kid's situation. Like, so in my mind, I'm like, huh. So I think, like, the whole thing is about pretending that I am completely fine and that everything is okay. So that, because I think if I end up disrupted, then that can lead the client to feel disrupted as well. But then that being said, the opposite can be said as well. If the client is telling us something's distressing and terrible and horrible, and I'm sitting there with a smile on my face, or feel like, you know, oh, it's okay, no big deal, then that's not connecting. That's not an attunement process. It's okay for us to be sad and angry and frustrated with what's happened to a client. So I think for us to say, you know, I'm really angry and afraid too as I hear you talk about this. I'm nervous as well. No wonder you feel this way. I feel it too. And that's, we call that in fancy terms, the use of self in social work, the use of self, that you can use yourself in the therapeutic process to say, I get it, I am feeling this as well. And then that's a point where the client can say, you know, I'm not alone in this. No wonder I'm feeling bad because, you know, I'm feeling, other people are feeling it too. That's an important thing. So those are two things to kind of think about. I have another one, but like, but the two things to think about, first of all, is like, and that we're not just so disrupted ourselves, just pretending that it's okay for a little bit. I think we can fake it for a little bit, just for a moment, just to kind of remain calm, to know so the client knows they have an anchor somehow. And then secondly, the other concept of the other extreme, and you have to use your sort of judgment on which approach is best. That, yeah, I feel afraid, I feel scared. This really bothers me to hear this. I'm so sorry you went through this. I'm feeling your pain as we talk right now. And boy, that can be really empowering to somebody to say, hey, this isn't all in my head. Other people feel this pain too. And then another thing to say is that it is flat out okay to say, hey, can you, do you mind if I step out for just a second? I have something else to just do real quick, or I have to run to the restroom, or really, I'm so thirsty, my mouth's dry, I need to get a quick drink. Pulling ourselves away from the moment sometimes just kind of jolts our head back into another place. So that is completely and utterly okay to do. And because if you're not in a safe, good, aware spot, there's no way you can help the client. So it's totally okay to get up and kind of go walk out, or maybe go talk to somebody real quick, or wash your face off in the sink, or whatever you need to do to kind of like pull yourself back, and then to kind of re-enter with the client, you know, maybe with a newer view on it. So those are just things to just recognize. And really, it's just, if you care and you care enough to do what you can for your clients, I mean, you know, there's of course best practices and there's things that work better than others, but your care is going to come through no matter what. If you might say something dumb, I say dumb in quotes, you know, you might say something that, wow, I never don't think I would have said that kind of thing, but it's okay. You're going to convey to the client that you care. And maybe you say something that's off the beaten track. Just okay to say, I'm sorry, I meant to say something different, or I should have redirected this in a different way. That's totally okay to say that. And I think that's good for clients too, to realize that, you know, we're not perfect and that we're not getting it all right every minute of the day, to kind of say, oh, look, I'm with you in this. And I think too, that's a trust building thing. Because as you noticed on the earlier thing with the principles of trauma-informed care is trustworthiness. If I, as a provider, trust you, my client, enough to be able to say, I'm afraid right now from what I'm hearing, or what I'm hearing makes me very sad, then there's a trust that's built. When we connect with other people on an emotional level, there's a level of trust that's built there, and I think that's okay. Yeah, I think coming in and saying, hey, I want you to trust me. They've heard that before. They've heard that from, you know, the people the coyotes that are ripping off people, and they've heard it from others that are trying to take advantage of them. That word isn't probably going to be a real welcome thing to hear. But hey, I want to earn your trust. What can I do to earn your trust more? That's a great kind of thing to say. What can I do? And as we go forth, I would love to earn your trust. What do I need to do that? And I think one of the things to do is to be real and say, I'm really feeling sad as you tell me this, and that's okay. So.
Oh, thank you for that, Father Reagan. It looks like there are no other questions, so I'll definitely let close this out.
Great. I hope that this was helpful and useful to you guys. And like my email address is rschriver@CatholicCharitiesUSA.org. So you can email me anytime if you want me to do a webinar for your agency alone, or if you want some more information or whatever. This is something I've sort of spent some of my efforts lately really studying and working with, and so I'm really honored to be able to talk to you. You all are doing the real work, and if I can help you all in any way, I'd be super happy to. So those are just some of the ideas that we have, and I'm glad that we've been able to have this time. And there was such a nice response to people being interested into some of these concepts. Maybe we'll hopefully have some of this in the future, some more information for you guys in the future.
Oh, Father Reagan, if you don't mind, can you repeat your email address?
Oh yeah, good idea. Okay, my name's Reagan, R-A-G-A-N, Schriver, S-C-H-R-I-V-E-R, but my email address is R, as in like Reagan, and then Schriver, S-C-H-R-I-V-E-R @CatholicCharitiesUSA, which is all one word, .org. And so it's R-S-C-H and then River, if that helps. So rschriver @CatholicCharitiesUSA.org. You're welcome to email if you want anything.
Yeah, just sending you praises. Folks are saying thank you and how appreciative they are for this session.
Great. Thank you guys very, very much. Thanks for attending, and God bless each of you in your work. And I just pray for you all. Pray for all of you today. So thank you. Alrighty. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a great day.